All right, can everyone hear me? All right, so let's begin. First of all, in the last session, we went ahead and created an EC... Hold on one second here. There we go. In the last session, we created an EC2 instance, which basically gave us an IP address, which is right here, which allows us to remotely connect to the server that we set up. So, first of all, let's go ahead and connect to the server. You'll see here that I have the live compsci.pem, which is the key which allows me to actually connect to the server, and I use the SSH command -I to specify the file, that is the key, and then Ubuntu @ and then the IP address. And that of course allows me to connect. Now to become root, which is another word for administrator, you type sudo bash. And here I showed you that you can type screen in order to actually have a way to run multiple terminals at a time. When you're in screen, you can press Control A and then C, like I just did. I just pushed Control A followed by C, and that creates a new screen session. So Control AC and I create another one, Control AC and I create another one. Now if I want, I can rename each of these. For example, if I push Control A, then I push Shift A, I can change this to whatever I want to call it. Let's call it Devel, which can be short for development. Now what's also nice is that you can leave your screen session exactly the way it is. Here, let's exit out of it. If I push Control A and then D, I can leave the screen session, and in fact I can completely log out of the server. So here I've completely logged out of the server that I was logged into, the server that's at Amazon. But if I connect back to it, if I run the same SSH command that I ran earlier, and I once again become root, if I type screen-ls, it will show me the active screens that I have open. And you see there the number right before the period, which is 5100. That tells me the number, the PID number, I believe. Let me just check real quick. Yeah, the process ID. Every process you run on Linux has its own process ID, and this right here, the 5100, is the process ID of the screen session. And the reason that's important is because I can actually get back into it. If I type screen space -x and then that process ID number, 5100, I'm back. And if I was working on something yesterday and I'm at a totally different place and I want to start working again, I can have my files open, I can have whatever it is I'm doing, and my screen will be completely the way I left it, which is very nice because a lot of times you might be working on something and get disconnected or whatever the case might be. So this is how you can save a screen session for later. And something else is you can have more than one screen. So for example, if I exit this one, which I do by pressing Control A and then D, that detaches me from this screen session. I can go ahead and create a brand new one by typing screen. Let me go ahead and give this a name. I'll just call it test, and let's create another one. If I exit this by pushing Control A and then D, and I type screen-ls again, you'll see that I have two screen sessions now. Now if I were to completely log out of the server, like this, and then log back in, and become root again, and type screen-ls, you'll notice that both of my screen sessions are still there, and I can tap into either one. The first one, and the second one. So that's how you do that. Alright, so let's go ahead and I only want one screen, so I'm going to kill one of them. So let me go into the 5550, and I'm just going to hit exit until, well, type exit until I'm out of it. When it says screen is terminating, that's how I know that it's terminated. So now if I do screen-ls, I can see which one is left, and I can get into that, and that is where we'll do all of these sessions. As to merging screens, yeah, what you can do actually is you can have a screen session that is itself a screen session within a screen session, so to say. In fact, sometimes when you're administering more than one server, I like to do that. What I'll do is I'll have at the bottom, this might be, for example, web server, and then the next one here might be database, and so on. And each of these would have a whole other row above it right here, right above that, which would be a whole set of screen sessions inside of each server. That way, from a single screen, I can manage as many servers as I need to, and as many projects as I need to. As far as having two screens open and merging them into a single screen session, I don't think you can do that, but you can achieve the same result by just having more screen sessions. All right, so let's go ahead and continue here. Now let's just say, okay. Now the other thing you can do is you can move on the bottom where you have the different labels for each screen number, you can move them around. If you push Control A and then colon, you can run special screen commands. Like if I type number 0, it'll move this one, which is called database, so that it becomes, as you see down here, 0. Or I can say, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Or I can say number 2 and move it to 2 and so on. So there's a lot of nice things you can do with screen. All right, so let's go ahead and go into our HTML directory. Right now, let's see, how do I want to do this? Yeah, let's go ahead and do this. We're going to create a new file. Going to call it index.php. And I'm just going to start typing out the very basics of HTML here. Now, there are different varieties of HTML. There's, like I mentioned in the previous session, there's XHTML, there's HTML5. We're not going to get into that yet. We will later on, depending on how advanced this gets. But for right now, you really just need to know the basics. Every HTML document generally begins with a tag that just simply says HTML, what you see here. Now, whenever I say tag, in HTML, a tag is anything that is enclosed within a less than sign and a greater than sign. We call those tags. So we start with an HTML tag, and then you're going to have all of your HTML, and then at the bottom you're going to have a /HTML tag, which is also called a closing tag, a closing HTML tag. The slash means that it's a closing tag. Generally speaking, whenever you have an opening tag, you're going to have a closing tag, but there are exceptions, and we'll get into that later. So we're going to create a very basic page here. Whenever you have an HTML page, you're generally going to have two sections. You're going to have the head, which includes the head and the /head tag, and you're going to have the body, which also is similar in that it has a body and a /body tag. So inside of here is where all of your content is going to go for your website. This is the stuff that is actually going to be visible to the person looking at the website. Everything here will be information that won't be necessarily seen, but has information about your web page. And there is something you can do here, which is to put the title of your page. So we can just say first page. And just so you can see what this does, And of course, :W is how you save a file when you're in Vim. And over here, if I just hit refresh, you'll see that all that shows up is the ... because in fact that is all that is in body. Now whenever you're writing HTML and code in general, it is good to format the code properly, and the way you do that with HTML is simply move everything so that I'm going to change the there. Before I get into those commands, notice how easy it is to read. I have my head tag, everything that's in head, and then I have /head, then body, everything that's in body, and then /body. So every time you have a new opening tag, you want to open it up in that. And we will get into the PHP aspect too, but this is, I'm just going over this for beginners before we get into that. So now let's go ahead and talk about how we do a basic form here. So inside of your body tag, you're going to create a form and a /form tag. And now I'm just going to put in a couple very basic elements here. And you'll see exactly what this does in just a second. And let's just do that. And we'll get through this fairly quickly. So if I refresh this page, you'll see that what I have is an input field where I can type something in, for example. Now, whenever you have a form, you want to have a way to submit it. And the way you do that is you have an input type equals submit. We'll get into that later, but right now I just want you to see the basics. And we're going to give this a name. We're going to call this field 1. Save this and refresh. Okay, so notice what we have. We have a simple input field. We can type something in, and then we have a submit button. Now, when we submit it, what's going to happen is that the data we submit, the data of the form, is going to be sent to a location. If you don't specify a location, it's going to go to the exact same page that you're on. But you can also specify it to go anywhere you want. It can be offsite or so on. So if we submit this, notice what happens at the top here where it says field 1 equals Carl. This is called an AV pair string. It's also called a query string. And whenever you are on a web page and you see something at the top of the URL that begins with a question mark, where you have question mark something equals whatever and so on, that is because the form submitted using something called GET. There are two ways that you can submit a form. There is GET and POST. The fundamental difference between the two is that when you submit a form with GET, it shows up in the URL. It becomes part of the URL. That's how the data is sent. Now we can have as many fields as we want, and they can all be sent with GET. I'm just going to create a bunch of other fields here. So we have 4 text fields, and if I refresh the page, you'll see there are 4 fields here, and if I fill out each one with some data and I hit submit, take a look at the URL. We have field 1 equals 1, field 2 equals 2, field 3 equals 3, and field 4 equals 4. So whenever you have the data in the URL, that data has been submitted using GET. The other way that you can submit data is using POST. And I'll show you how to do that. If we go back to our form tag here, and I type method equals POST, I could have also typed method equals GET, and of course we would have what we just saw, but if we want, we can specify POST. And now what happens when we submit the same data here? Actually, let me go ahead and clear that out first. Okay. And now what's happened here is that the data was still submitted, but you don't see it in the URL bar. Now, there's a few important implications of this. If you're doing anything secure, like you have an order form or something like that where people are submitting sensitive information or maybe a username and password, you never use get. You always use post because you don't want the information to be visible in the URL for two reasons. The first is someone who might happen to be looking at the person's computer would see that information and you could compromise their security. And the second is it could actually show up in log files, and it can be possible for there to be a security compromise that way. So very briefly, let me jump over to this other screen, which I did by pushing Control A and then N. And let me go into this directory, var/log Apache 2. So var/log/Apache 2. And you'll notice that there is a file here called other vhost access.log. If I type tail-f other vhost access.log, what it'll do is it'll show me, actually let me just see something here. Okay. I actually want access log in this case. If I type tail-f access log, what it will do is it will show me this log file as it happens. So if, for example, I hit refresh on this page, you'll see down here at the bottom that it actually shows that I've connected to the URL, and you can see the post, you can see a lot of information, you can see the operating system, you can see various other information pertaining to that. So watch what happens if I put something in the URL here. Do you see that? So if you were having a web form and you're sending sensitive information like usernames and passwords and such, then should your log file ever get seen, or should there be another log file that you don't know about, then it is entirely possible for people's information to become compromised. And you could have an order form, and it could be an issue with credit card numbers or whatever the case is. So that is why you don't use get in order to handle sensitive information. You always use post. And now watch what happens when I do this using post. Again, we're looking at the log file, and if I fill in this data and I hit submit, you see it says post. I know that something was posted, but I can't see what it was. There's nothing here that actually reveals what the actual information was. So does anyone have any questions about this before I go on? Okay, so let's go back to our form that we're building here. Get being default has basically been the way it always is. I really can't answer that other than to say that it's just always been that get is default. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to actually start getting into some of the basics of PHP here. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and remember from the last session I told you that anything that you do with PHP always begins with $PHP, and then you can put a PHP command here. So just for the fun of it, let's do this. I'll save it, and let's hit refresh and take a look at what happens. And you see the word testing there because of this PHP command. Well, one thing I could do is I could actually replace the word testing here with one of these input fields. And make sure I'm going to delete these other ones to make it more clear. So this input field was created using this line of PHP. Okay, so let's do something interesting. Let's make it so that whenever we fill in this data, like if I put in my name here and I hit submit, let's make it so that the page knows to put this data right back here, and maybe even type a little message saying that it knows what was typed. So remember that when we submit a form using get, in fact we're going to switch to get temporarily just so I can show you the basics of how this works. What we need to do is, let's do this. Let's say hello, and this is where I want it to put whatever was typed here. So I want it to say hello Carl, but I want it to say that based on knowing that Carl is what was typed in this field. So the way we can do that, let me go ahead and show you what this looks like first. If I type Carl and I hit submit, notice what it says, field 1 equals Carl. And the reason it says field 1 is because that's the name we gave it over here. So what I can do now is I can type this, $PHP, echo, and now I need to specify that this is field 1 from get. And the way I do that is $_get, and then brackets to indicate that this is going to be an element of get, and then I can put field 1. And now if I just hit refresh, you'll see that it now says hello Carl. If I type something else here, you'll see that it says hello testing. So that's how that works. All right, any questions on this so far? Okay, then let's start getting into some of the more interesting aspects of PHP here. Yes, I'll be explaining sanitizing input, and I'll actually be showing some examples of what can happen if you don't, although I don't know for sure if that'll be something we get to during this session or not. All right, now we're going to talk about some of the good practices you do when you are writing in PHP. In the example I just showed you, I basically did a mix of HTML and PHP. I have my HTML, and then I have $PHP, then I have HTML again. Generally speaking, that is not what you do. Now you can, it's viable, you can do that, but it can lead to a number of problems. One is if you ever want to have someone redesign the website, and they happen to know HTML and they know how to make a website look good, but they don't know PHP or they don't know how to program, then they won't be able to do it. So that's one problem you have. Another problem is you just get code that's very hard to read because it's a mix of different languages. So one of the things that you want to do is to separate your PHP, your HTML, your JavaScript, all of the different languages and technologies that you're using. You want to have them separated. Even though technically you don't have to, it makes for a much easier situation to manage. And I'll be showing you how to do that. So first of all, let's go ahead and leave this. Yeah, this is fine. So right now we have our var www.html directory, and all we have in it is index.php. We're going to create a directory here called, let's just call it the framework. That's where we're going to actually put our framework. Now we're going to create a different directory for PHP, a directory for HTML, and so on. And for right now, I'm just going to do this very basic. I'm going to make a directory. I'm going to call it HTML. That's where we're going to put our HTML-related files and information. We're going to make a directory called, just for right now, PHP. That's where we'll put everything PHP-related, and we'll make more later. But right now, I just want you to see that there is the idea here that we are separating the HTML and the PHP. And when we talk about a model view controller, MVC, what we're basically saying here is that we are separating the functionality. We're going to have the models, which is related to our data, and data can be anything. It can be a database of usernames and passwords, or information, or content. All of the different data that you're using in order to create your site, we can refer to that as data, and generally speaking, the model aspect of model view controller handles the data. Then view refers to literally what people are going to see, and this refers to those aspects that are going to handle how it looks. And controller is going to be all of the back-end programming code. So these three segments are separated, which allows you as the programmer to focus on each one individually, so that when you're working on the controller, you're not going to affect something that is in the model or the view. That's the idea. The basic idea is that you're separating the components to keep everything organized and to make sure that you have a clean system. And as I get into this, a lot more of that will become clear. But for right now, I just want you to understand the basics of what a model view controller is and what it means. It's definitely more subtle than that, and we'll get into that later. But right now, we've separated our HTML and our PHP. So we can think of this as a view controller right now. We don't really have a model because we don't really have data. We're not working with the database yet. But we have our view, which is going to be HTML, and we have our controller, which is going to be all of the PHP code. So let's start by making a very simple example of this. So let's go into the HTML. And we're going to create a file here. Let's just call it index.html. I'm just going to write this really quick here. Okay. Now, just so you can see what that page looks like now that I build it. There. Oops. What did I call it? Oh. And there you go. Now, writing index.html at the end here is optional. If I just were to type /html, it will give me the same thing. I just write index.html so that it's clear, especially for people who are new. So the idea here is that content is a placeholder for whatever we want to put there. So let's go into the PHP directory, and we're going to create a file called index.php. We're only going to write PHP here. We're not going to write anything in HTML. This is all going to be PHP. So to start with, the goal here is that this PHP file, this PHP program, is going to load the content from this page, but it's going to replace content with actual content. So first of all, let's do this. And those two commands are just to make it so that when I hit tab, it doesn't go too far over. Now, let's do this. In PHP, whenever you create a variable, you put $ and then the variable name. So I'm just going to say $HTML equals, and then I want the contents of the file we just looked at. So for right now, I'm just going to do it like this. File get contents, and then the whole path of the file for right now. I'll show you simpler ways later, but for right now, that's how we're going to do it. Now I'm just going to echo the contents of that file. So let's see what happens when I do that. Oops. That would be PHP. Okay, so you see here that it's loading the view. If we think of this as a view, it's loading the view and displaying it to the web browser. Now, if we wanted to, we could actually just set content. Here, for example, I'm just going to do a string replace of the word content with the braces, and I'm just going to say something. Oops. Like that. And now if I hit refresh, oops, that, oops, there we go. And there you go. Now the string replace function in PHP, you have to specify what it is you're replacing, what you're replacing it with, and then the source, which in this case is $HTML. So let's be clear, $HTML is a variable. It contains the actual contents of this file. Over here, let's go ahead and open that file. And I'll name this HTML and okay, so any questions so far? Yes, string replace is built in. In fact, PHP has a lot of built-in functions, and PHP.net is a fantastic resource where you can find out all about the different functions. And the nice thing about PHP.net is that if you ever do get confused about a particular function, all you have to do is just go to php.net/that function, and it'll tell you all about it with examples, and it's very beginner friendly. In fact, PHP is, I think, one of the most beginner friendly languages there is, which is why I picked it for this course specifically. So notice that what we're doing here with PHP is we're taking a view which has placeholders for content, and then we're filling in the content using PHP. Now, one very nice aspect about a model view controller is that when you go to any page, like here, let's say I go to framework/something. Obviously, this doesn't exist. But ideally, you want your framework to handle whatever someone does, whatever URL someone puts in, because then you can do some interesting things. You can make it so that the URLs can themselves lead the viewer to the content they want. You could have something like this. You could have /news/today/US. And you don't actually have a directory structure on your website that has a literal directory news, today, and US. But what you can do is your model view controller can interpret that URL and then properly lead someone to where you want them to go. So you can basically have dynamic URLs, and I'll show you how to do that here shortly. So the first thing that you need to understand about that is in any directory, when you are running the web server Apache, there is a special file called .htaccess. And the way htaccess works is you can specify rules that your web server will adhere to, and those rules can, for example, make it so that if anyone tries to access a certain thing, you won't let them, or maybe you'll force them to only look at, PHP files, or whatever the case is. You can specify what the index file is. And what's nice is there's something called mod rewrite. And mod rewrite, which is something we're going to have to install here, mod rewrite is a special addition to Apache that allows you to take a URL that was written one way and rewrite it a different way. And I'll show you how to do that. So first of all, let's go ahead and install mod rewrite. Now, if I typed apt cache search, let's just do rewrite. That'll show me a list of all the different packages I can install that contain the word rewrite. If I want to look at less information, I can type grep Apache, and now I'll look at only those lines that contained Apache. And let me do one more thing here. It may even already be installed. I'll find that out shortly. Okay, so maybe it is installed. I'll find out. So I'm going to try to create a .htaccess file that is going to force anything we do within /framework to be handled by our model view controller. And here's how we do that. First of all, we're going to type rewrite engine on, rewrite condition, server file name just refers, well, how do I explain this? Basically what we're doing here is we want to make sure that direct access to files and directories is prohibited. So if someone is trying to access an exact file like /html/something.html, we don't want them to. We want to force everything to go through our model view controller. That's the idea here. So !F will, this line here will take care of that for files, and then we do that one more time with -D, and that will take care of it for directories. And you'll see what that does here shortly. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to create a rewrite rule. And when you're creating a rewrite rule, you're actually using regular expressions to do that. Regular expressions refers to a special syntax you can use in a lot of different languages in order to match text. And in regular expressions, you basically type certain characters to mean different things about the text that you are trying to match. So if I put a caret character, that just simply means the start of the string. Then if I were to put parentheses, then what I'm saying is anything within those parentheses I want to be remembered. A $sign means the end of the string. So just to be clear, the caret means the beginning of the string, the $sign means the end of the string, and the parentheses just means I want to remember what was in those parentheses. And last, I'm going to put a dot, which means anything. A dot just means any character. And then a plus, which means whatever was before the plus more than once, at least once or more than once. So the plus just means at least once, but as many as there are. So this strange line of text, as cryptic as it appears, literally just says you have the start of the string, you have the end of the string, then you have a character, any character, a certain number of times. So all this is going to do is it's going to match everything, the entire line, from beginning to end. And then what we want to do is say that for all of that, we want to simply call index.php. So what that means is no matter what is typed into the web browser, no matter what URL is typed in, it's just going to pretend that index.php was typed in, but it's still going to be able to, we'll still be able to use that information. And the last thing I want to do here is I want to create an option which will say that we're not going to allow anyone to see an index of all of the files in a directory. And that's just simply to make sure that nobody can see files we don't want them to see. So we're going to save that, and now we're going to find out if mod rewrite is actually installed by seeing if it actually works. So do we have an index.php? Let's create one real quick. I'm just going to create a quick index.php just to confirm that this works. When you use the cat command and a greater than sign to actually start writing information into a file, when you're done you hit Control D. That's D as in David, and then that saves the file. And then you can see that there it is. So now we're going to find out if this works. And it didn't, so that means that mod rewrite is not installed, so I get to do that. So let's see what we need to do here. Okay, so the first thing I'm doing is I'm searching through this server to see if mod rewrite is somewhere else. Update DB is a command that just tells Linux, update your information of where every file is. Okay, so mod rewrite is in this directory, so let's see if I just need to enable it. I'm in my etc Apache 2 directory, which you remember from the last session. That's where I went in order to change the directory that my web docs were in. So I've got this mods enabled directory. Oops. Let's check that. Nothing rewrite is in here. Let's go into our mods available directory. Rewrite.load. So my guess is going to be that we just need to copy, oops, CP for copy, rewrite.load into mods enabled, and restart Apache. And let's see if that was right. Nope, not yet. So let's see why not. Let's see if there is this is the error.log, which can sometimes help you figure things out. So but it's not complaining about rewrite engine. That's interesting. All right, well, let's see here. I think there's actually a command with Apache that you need in order to enable a mod, in order to enable a module. Mod enable or something like that. Let me just look that up real quick. I think it's A2 enable mod or something like that. So let's just take a look. And keep in mind, even when you do this for a living, you don't have all the commands always memorized. That's what's nice about having access to Google, is you can always look things up. Okay, A2 nmod rewrite. Now, this says sudo, but I'm already root, so sudo is irrelevant, so I can just do that. I'm actually going to erase the file that I created earlier, the mods enabled when I was trying to do it on my own. And there we go. Okay, now let's see if it works. So it is not looking at the .htaccess file, it would seem. Let me just make sure this works. Okay, so we know our index.php is there, but it's not actually, it's as if the htaccess file we just made isn't being considered. We know it's there, so there's probably a setting that I need to do in Apache in order to make it so that it will read the htaccess file. All right, so let's check that out. Yep, I do believe you're right. It is allow override. So I'm going to go into my sites enabled here. Ah, there you go. So we're going to change allow override none to allow override all. And this is irrelevant. And don't even worry about that. Okay. And try restarting Apache. Okay. And now, okay, there you go. So now you see that even if you put in a wrong URL, it is forcing it to go to our framework. Basically, it's loading index.php no matter what URL we put in. So let's go ahead and go back to our directory here. And this is the step-by-step process that you go through. You're basically trying to troubleshoot as you go. Okay, something doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Look it up, figure it out, and then of course move on. So now the next thing is, how do we get to see what this information is? We know that it's calling index.php, but how do we actually get to know what was typed in the URL? And if we go and edit this index.php, I can do something here. I can say echo server $_server. This remember that $_get would show you what was submitted in a get form. Similarly, $_post. Sorry about that. $_post would show you what was submitted in a post form. $_server refers to special kinds of variables that are determined at the server, and one of those includes the URL that was typed in. And in this case, we want request URI. And you'll see exactly what that does. All I have here is my index.php does nothing more other than echo request URI. So if I go here and I hit enter, you'll see now that I have the ability to see what was put in the URL. Now if I want to be kind of clever here, I can do this. Let's say /name/Carl. Now earlier we did the whole thing where it said hello Carl. If I wanted to do that here, what I can do is I can create a variable called URI and set it equal to that. And I should actually put that shift with and tab stop into my vimrc. I'll do that later. That way I don't have to type it in every time. And now I can do this. I can remember the regular expressions that I showed you. We're going to be doing a lot of that. Regular expressions is very important. There's a command in PHP called preg_match. Preg being short for Perl regular expressions. Whenever I write out a regular expression, I actually do this as a reflex. What I just typed, I didn't even think about it when I typed it. These 4 letters here are special parameters to the they're options to the regular expression function that tell certain things. Like, for example, the I means case insensitive. It's going to match uppercase and lowercase letters. The M, I believe, is for multi-line. And the S and the X right offhand, I'm actually not entirely sure of. I always write out IMSX because it's the right options that I just always use. So if you want, you can feel free to look those up. I could certainly do that, but there's no reason to. So inside of these 2 characters, which you see are exclamation marks, this is where I'm going to put in what the actual regular expression is that I'm looking for. And I specifically want /name/ and then whatever is there. That's it. Now remember before, the parentheses is something you do in order to make it so that your regular expression is saved so that it can be looked at later. And so what I'm saying here is I want to match for /name/ and then whatever is in between the next slashes, which in this case is going to be Carl, that's what I want to match for. And then I need to specify what it is I'm looking at. In this case, I'm looking at $URI. I could have just as easily typed out this whole thing there, but that's why I made it into a variable so that I just have to type $URI and it's easy to read. And then the last thing I have to do is I have to specify a new variable that is going to contain the match. Generally, I just call that pmatches. So if I do this and I say echo hello pmatches1, and I hit refresh, you'll see that it says hello Carl. Now, I don't actually write variables inside of quotes like that. You can. What I usually do is I separate the text from the variables with a period, which means concatenation, and it would look like this. So here I'm saying hello, then a dot to concatenate, followed by the variable. Now, why is this 1 and not 2 or something else? Because it's the first set of parentheses. If I wanted to, I could do this. I could make it so that name itself is 1 set. And now if I run this, you'll see that pmatches1 will actually be name. And pmatches2 will be Carl. Now the reason this is important is because we're going to need to look at these matches in order to figure out how we want our framework to direct people. That goes back to the thing where I said /news, /US, and so on, or whatever the case is. So up until now, does anyone have any questions? Does everyone understand? Yes, that's a good question, and the answer is yes, it will, but we want that. What we want is everything anyone does to specifically hit index.php, because what we're going to do is we're going to make index.php the controller. The controller is going to determine where everybody gets routed. So no matter what you type in, no matter what URL, we want it to go to index.php. And if we were deploying this on a real site, we wouldn't even have this /framework here. We would just make it so that anything that anyone typed into the URL is going to hit that same PHP file. And that PHP file is going to be the router of sorts. It's going to look at the URL, look at the credentials of the person, say, hey, are they logged in? Are they not logged in? Should they be in the public part of the site, the private part? Where am I going to send them? And then it is going to control the process of their entire session. And that is really the first major element of what makes this an MVC controller, an MVC framework, is this specific aspect. And the idea here is that you're going to have all of the functionality related to controlling the session. That's the C of MVC. So this index.php that we're creating here is really the C. And that's the idea. So no matter what URL we go to, we know that it's going to hit the exact same place, which means that we can control every single session from the same place, whether they're logged in, not logged in, and so on. And then we worry about creating our content in a totally different way. So any other questions? And we're at the end of this session, basically, so this is really just questions and answers time. So everybody feel free to ask whatever questions you want. I'm going to do this every week, so the next one is going to be Saturday at the same time. So 9 p.m. Eastern every Saturday. Yep, I think this is the kind of thing that'll grow over time. And one thing that I'm trying to do when I do these videos is I'm trying to make it so that if someone is just joining, or maybe they haven't seen the last sessions, they'll still be able to follow along. So this is less like a tutorial and more like a watch me do something. Including watch me Google for things when I don't know, because I'm doing this entirely blind, because that's the whole idea. Well, one thing I recommend that you do is make sure that you can actually duplicate what you saw. Everyone who watched this should be able to, on their own, set up a server at Amazon or wherever you're going to set up your server and actually set up the basics of a model view controller using what we did. And if there's any aspect that you don't understand about PHP or something that I did in this video, just feel free to ask. Whether, it doesn't have to be right now, just send me a message and I'll be glad to help you out. But I definitely recommend that anyone watching this try to do it on their own, because it's easy when you watch someone do it and you can think, okay, I know how to do that, but make sure that you actually can. And then when you're watching the video, you can see the process I went through, the different commands. One other thing that I'll point out too is that not just different operating systems, but even different distributions of the same operating system, for example, different distributions of Linux, you do things in slightly different ways, but you're still fundamentally doing the same thing. So the command to, let's say, install Apache might be different if you're, let's say, on Red Hat. But the idea is the same. It's just the commands are going to be a little different. And that's something that I'm trying to demonstrate here, is the process in as much as the actual commands to do it. Anyone else have any questions? Yep, definitely we'll be getting into SQL in the next session. Of course, that's one of the trade-offs. If I had before doing this session, if I had spent some time to actually go through the process that I would have gone through, then I wouldn't have had to Google anything, but then I would have also deprived you from seeing how someone actually works, which is, you know what, you don't remember the commands every single time, you have to look them up, and that takes time sometimes. And that's the whole idea. I want you to see that. I want you to see that, you know, this is the actual process that you go through when you're troubleshooting. How you troubleshoot, what do? You check the URL. You know, does the URL work? It doesn't. Check the log file. Check the error log. Make sure that, you know, the whole process that you saw me go through, I want you to get a feel for that, because that's realistic. That's what you do when you're in a real working environment. And I think that you'll find that 80% of the time that you're working will be spent trying to solve problems, and 20% will be spent actually implementing what you already know, and that's just the way it works. So the speed at which you can troubleshoot and solve a problem and figure out why something doesn't work is always going to be a major factor to how quickly you can develop in general. Any other questions? Yeah, probably not the best question for this session, but I'll be glad to answer that. You know, talking about Python or C. If you go to Computer Science for Everyone and join the chat there, I'm usually there, and I'll be glad to talk about that there. I just want to keep everything focused. And just to remind everyone, that's the main website. That's where you can watch this video, previous videos, and a whole lot of videos and lessons about C programming, as well as live chat if you have any questions. So I guess that concludes this session. If anyone has any questions later, feel free to ask me. I'll be glad to help you out. And I hope everyone enjoyed this. See you next week.